Millennials often are the first ones in the chain of their ancestry to break away from religion, but religion is dying. They simply can't stomach how the Christian right has treated LGBTQ people, for example. And this is the moment that Nietzsche feared.
The overarching idea of this woman's video is that religion is dying. We see millennials and Gen Z fleeing organized religion and becoming more secular. So the problem the West is going to have is we're going to have a bunch of nihilistic atheists running around with nothing to fill their void. And apparently they're all just going to be killing themselves. And this video is so filled with problems, I'm going to stick to the one most central flaw that she bases all her other errors around, which is the idea that religion is dying and that we're going to have an upcoming generation of nihilists. Claims about the decline of religion in the West are largely exaggerated. People like the woman in this video often get this idea from various studies by the Pew Research Center, which have done large surveys on people's religious affiliation. And in those studies, we see a growing percentage of the American population which identify as none or not affiliated with the major religious denominations. So people like the woman in this video say, oh, the religiously unaffiliated are growing, so we're becoming more secular, we're becoming more atheistic. We're going to have a generation of nihilistic atheists on our hands. And this is not even close to accurate, because many of the people who identify as none or religiously unaffiliated in those surveys, they still believe in things like God or a higher power or heaven, belief that Jesus is the Son of God, and things like that. In fact, data from Baylor's religious surveys estimate that the actual number of religiously unaffiliated are lower than what other studies have suggested because of issues with using some of these generic denominational labels and how people perceive their beliefs. Not only that, but looking at the beliefs of the younger generations when one moves past these labels doesn't paint the picture that the woman in this video thinks it does. The Pew Research Center knows that as people get older, they tend to become more interested and involved with religion. And millennials are in many ways in lockstep with previous generations when you factor in where they are at in their life cycle. I'm going to quote just a few examples from a 2010 study by the Pew Research Center that I think will demonstrate how the woman in this video is playing fast and loose with the data that we have. Pew Research Center surveys show, for instance, that young adults' beliefs about life after death and the existence of heaven, hell, and miracles closely resemble the beliefs of older people today. Though young adults pray less often than their elders do today, the number of young adults who say they pray every day rivals the portion of young people who said the same in prior decades. And though belief in God is lower among young adults than among older adults, millennials say they believe in God with absolute certainty at rates similar to those seen among Gen Xers a decade ago. This suggests that some of the religious differences between younger and older Americans today are not entirely generational, but result in part from people's tendency to place greater emphasis on religion as they age. Next quote, Gallup surveys conducted over the past 30 years that use a similar measure of religion's importance confirm that religion is somewhat less important for millennials today than it was for members of Generation X when they were of a similar age. And Gallup surveys in the late 2000s, 40% of millennials said religion is very important, as did 48% of Gen Xers in the late 1990s. However, young people today look very much like baby boomers did at a similar point in their life cycle. In a 1978 Gallup poll, 39% of boomers said religion was very important to them. Next quote, the long-running survey also finds that young people attend religious services less often than their elders. Furthermore, millennials currently attend church or worship services at lower rates than baby boomers did when they were younger. 18% of millennials currently report attending religious services weekly or nearly weekly, compared with 26% of boomers in the late 1970s. But millennials closely resemble members of Generation X when they were in their 20s and early 30s, when 1 in 5 Gen Xers reported attending religious services weekly or nearly weekly. Put simply, the woman in this video is pulling data out of her ass. She then leaps to the conclusion that because of the data we have, we're going to have an entire generation of nihilistic atheists running around who think life is meaningless and absurd. Again, despite all of our current data, which suggests that atheism has always been and will continue to be a very minority position.